teaching environmental education at Evergreen College, but in the satellites that were on the Western Washington Indian reservations. And then I'm not sure when you returned back to Evergreen, but he went back to Evergreen, and so his total time at Evergreen was about 37 years teaching environmental science. And during that time, and actually, I guess in the early 70s, he started hiking in Mount Rainier and working. I think he did some work in Mount Rainier, at least according to his biography in the back. And it inculcated a love for Mount Rainier. He's done Wonderland Trail a lot of times, and pretty much everywhere else on Mount Rainier as well, Jeff, I think. And but what he has done after writing the book has gotten a series of talks going that he can present on Zoom. And when I heard that one of them was on the birds of Mount Rainier, which he talked about in a very interesting way, I thought, in his book, I emailed him and I said, Jeff, can you speak to our group? And he agreed. So he is here tonight, and I very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Great job, Leslie. Excellent intro. And you told the truth pretty much, which I hope to do the same tonight too. It's really good, thank you. And thanks for inviting me. You made contact, and I really appreciate that. And thanks for whoever's doing the tech stuff behind the scenes tonight. Really great, appreciate that. Good to be with y'all, really wonderful to be here. If you can tell me in my background, the spot from which that photograph was taken at Mount Rainier, first person to guess right, you can tell me in the Q&A afterwards, and I'll send you a copy of the book. See how well you know Mount Rainier. And just a very minor clarification, Leslie, I taught at Evergreen for about 17 or 18 years. My entire teaching career was about 37 or 38 years. So been retired since 2015. And the whole reason this got started was I was planning to teach a class on Mount Rainier at the Evergreen State College. And I couldn't find the right kind of book that I wanted to read with the students. And my colleague said, well, knucklehead, you're the guy that's supposed to write the book. So it only took 10 years, which I guess is a fast track to write a book. And so that's a little bit, and as Leslie said, that's a little bit about what I'm going to talk with you about tonight. I want to get us started. I want to make sure that we're doing a sound check, that everybody has me loud and clear. If you don't, just speak up, because I'm going to use some audio clips tonight of some bird songs, and you want to make sure that you hear those as well. Okay. Sounds like we're all right. So let's go ahead and get rolling. So as Leslie said, I'm going to talk to you about a few stories that are in my natural history of Mount Rainier. It's called Tahoma and Its People, and published last year by WSU Press. You might know that Tahoma is one of several Native American names for the mountain. And if you'd like to know more about that or ask me more about that, just please do at the end. I love the question and answer period. So feel free to send those questions right now into the chat feature, and we'll get to them at the end. Tonight's talk, as we said, is actually going to focus in on the birds. There's a ton of stories to tell about Mount Rainier. The Native people in this area have taught me so much about the mountain. The men and women in the National Park Service at Mount Rainier National Park allowed me to spend so much time with them in the field. They drugged me onto glaciers. They had me help out at archaeological excavations. They had me, follow them around in the field. In fact, doing some of the field work for this talk tonight. But I think what the best thing to do tonight is we're just going to narrow it down. And what I call tonight's talk is the special birds of Mount Rainier. And after you've seen the talk, you might think, well, actually, this talk could really be called Shooting Owls, Kidnapping Eggs, and Birds Flying 100 Miles an Hour, because all of those things I'm going to talk about each of those things happening in tonight's talk. For now, let's just stick to special birds and being, Kittitas Audubon chapter, being birders or aficionados of birds. Most of us love quizzes and challenges and those sorts of things. So let's get warmed up. I'm going to just shoot you some photos of some common Mount Rainier birds. This is low stakes, low pressure. no grades, no prizes. And just, get yourself warmed up by checking out a few of these most common birds at Mount Rainier. So let's get started. Is there anybody here who's having a really hard time besides me adjusting from gray jay to Canada jay? We've had a lot of name changes in the last 40 years, right? But I tell you, gray jay to Canada jay, that's a tough one. Anyway, common bird of the forest. Here is the closest living relative of the black-capped chickadee, known to you and me as mountain chickadee, DD, of course. Well, if it's blue and if it's a bird, it must be a bluebird, right? Correct answer, yes, it is. Half right, mountain bluebird. And I think this next one starts off with an audio cue. So listen to this and see what you think. And if you can't hear that, somebody just speak up right now and tell me. We good?
I didn't hear anything other than static, but.
Did anybody else have a problem?
Ruffed grouse.
Good guess. You're in the ballpark.
We heard it.
Okay, so folks, most folks heard it. So we'll continue. So here's the visual.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, there he is. Yeah.
Ooh,
That's nice.
Sooty grouse.
Is
Yeah,
that
good.
sooty? Yeah.
Sooty grouse. And you and I, for many years, you and I knew this as blue grouse. And of course, you know that it's been split into sooty on the coast and was it dusky, I think, in the inland areas. This photo was taken last summer at Mount Rainier by a student intern of mine. This guy has a real knack for photography. So I used a couple of Creston's pictures in tonight's talk. Pretty nice stuff he's got there. So then there's, let's see. Oh yeah, love this guy, right? One of the best dressed birds on the mountain. One of the corvids. And of course, who we're talking about is Clark's nutcracker. And you probably know, and living where you do, you might know some of the story between Clark's nutcracker and whitebark pines. Whole books have been written about this mutualist relationship between these two organisms. And I could give an entire talk on just that alone. Suffice it to say that one of the reasons I love Clark's nutcracker is that it's the only bird that we know of that has a built-in snack pouch. Believe it or not, it has a little pouch under its tongue where it can store up to a couple tablespoons of whitebark pine nuts. So as it's collecting these, foraging around and collecting these whitebark pine nuts out of the cones, it will collect a bunch of them in this little pouch, will fly off then to other part on the mountain and cache these seeds in like groups of 4 or 5 or 7 seeds, a couple of inches, below the surface. And these birds are so smart, so sharp, of course, corvids, they use visual cues in the landscape, like a huge old snag or a rock outcrop to help them remember where they actually had planted, had cached these seeds. And those seeds that aren't recovered by them, that's how the whitebark pine propagates itself. Those seeds will germinate and grow eventually. So really cool relationship. Lots more to say about that. Just ask a question if you like when we get there. Then getting a little closer to our special birds, the next group of birds are ones that are sought by people from outside the region. Folks travel a long distance to come to Mount Rainier to try to find these 3 particular target birds at Mount Rainier.
Oh, rosy finches.
Yeah, this is one of the toughest customers there is. This bird is adapted to probably the most extreme environments in North America. Gray crown, oops, what is it? Yeah, gray crowned rosy finch. And I only see these a couple of times each summer, usually in the Sunrise area, usually around the edge of a snow patch where they're picking off insects. And then, of course, folks also travel to Mount Rainier, hoping that they can get a look at this bird.
Oh, ptarmigan.
Yeah. White-tailed ptarmigan. So another one of what I call the chickens, like the grouse. And a friend of mine always used to say, you don't see the grouse. You don't find the grouse, they find you. And sure enough, I can't tell you how many times I've tried to find white-tailed ptarmigan. And when you're not looking for them is just about the time that a hen and 4 or 5 chicks will come straggling across the trail in front of you. So the last target bird for many people from outside the region, I'm going to give you an audio. So listen to this.
Which owl was that?
Yeah. Here's your visual. And
Take me?
close. Good guess. What we got is a boreal owl.
Oriole. Oh.
And I have never seen a boreal owl at Mount Rainier National Park. But one of the things I love about these birds, like many of the owls, the boreal owl has these crazy asymmetrical ear openings in the side of its head. You probably know this if you're a longtime birder. They have these crazy ear openings that are offset, asymmetrical. And if you'd like me, again, to talk a little bit about that, just ask a question at the end. Not all of the owls have that feature, but in the boreal, it's especially pronounced. So now we can hone in on our special birds. We're going to take a look at three different species tonight, that each of which are protected under the Endangered Species Act. Two of them are in pretty much dire straits. And the third one that we're going to close with is a bird that's enjoying a pretty nice recovery. So we might get a little bit of bad news, but we're going to get to end on an up note. Okay. So here's your audio for the first special bird of Mount Rainier. That's a little short. Let's play that one again. Here you go. Okay, here comes your visual cue with a multiple choice. So sit tight. Are your choices?
Okay.
Is it woodsy owl? Northern spotted?
No, it's just northern spotted.
Great gray, barred owl. Those of you that think B, northern spotted owl, you've got it. This is a subspecies of the spotted owl, the only subspecies of the spotted owl in our region here. And most of us know these as birds of the deep, dark forests, and that's where they nest primarily in mature and old growth forests. And of course, because of the widespread old growth logging in the 19th and 20th century, the numbers of these birds really plummeted dramatically. And in 1990, biologists, environmentalists, and other folks really felt like they won a huge victory when this bird was listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act in 1990. There has been a long-term population study of northern spotted owls going on at Mount Rainier for over 25 years now. And I'd like to kind of take you on like a little virtual field trip, if you would, to see what folks do on these surveys, what that's like, and then we'll take a look at some of the data to see where these owls are at. So our goal, here's what we're hoping for, okay? We hope to get a close-up of an adult northern spotted owl. Notice that this one has a pink and white bracelet on its leg. So it has already previously been snagged by biologists. That's the way that they identify these birds, is to put anklets on them, bands on them. And you'll notice this bird, that doesn't look like it's eating like a native mouse, does it? No, that's actually eating a lab mouse. And what you and I are going to do is we're going to head off with the biologists into the woods, armed with our day packs, some snacks, water, rain gear, the usual stuff, plus a digital playback device so that we can play calls of the northern spotted owl, hoping to get a response from parent bird. And if we do, then the job is run off like crazy people in the direction from which the call came, hoping to get a look at this adult bird. And if we find it, then we'll put down one of these lab mice on a stump or in an open area and wait. And what we hope happens is that the adult bird flies in, snags the first mouse. Usually they bolt it down, they eat it completely. And then if we put a second mouse down, the idea is that that parent bird might take that mouse and fly off to its young. And that's who we want to get a look at. We want to get a look at the young birds, see if we can possibly band and weigh them today. So that's the idea. So on this particular day, it's yours and my lucky day. All of those things happen. We were led to 2 young birds. You see one right in the middle of the screen here. And right below that bird, can you see a researcher in kind of a blue cap? Well, Keith there has a long pole with kind of a catching, like a noose type device that he's got in his hand, and he's preparing to snag the sibling that you see partially hidden behind that left-hand tree there. Can you see that? These birds are not shy. They're easily approachable by humans. And so you can get up on them like this. And so in a little bit of time, these birds are snagged pretty easily, brought into hand. They're banded, they're weighed, several other measurements are taken, notes are made on their molt, on their plumage. This was about mid-July, so these birds were not quite ready to fledge, but they were too young, were doing quite well. And so after the measurements are taken, you might see the new red bracelet on that particular bird's leg there, just below Russ's hand, left hand. You might see that. And then the birds are set free. And we make our notes, eat some snacks, and head back. And all of this takes place in just about a morning. You and I just had a really lucky day to just get all this taken care of in just about a half a day. So what are the numbers telling us? What do we know? Well, for one thing, we're going to take a quick look at 3 sites in Washington State that are being surveyed long-term. If you look over here, this would be year 1 when the researchers, all the birds that they found in that particular year, they considered that 100% of the population, okay? And if you and I were now to focus just on the Rainier population, and we go through the years as we go to the right of the table, at the end of 20 years, you can see that now researchers are finding only about 40% of the population of northern spotted owls at Mount Rainier National Park. So a 60% decline in that 20-year period. And the bad news that accompanies that is that this is a trend region-wide. All populations of northern spotted owls are imperiled at this point. So obviously, one of the questions is, what's going on? We got them protected. The logging of old growth forests was slowed down considerably. Some would say stopped altogether. How does that even happen that the birds continue to decline? Well, there still has been some loss of old growth habitat as early as recently as up to 2012, over 1.6 million acres of old growth good habitat for spotted owls was logged off in those 3 states. And interestingly, and probably most importantly here, what's happened in just the last couple of decades is an interloper has come onto the scene. Who's that? Who cooks for you? Believe it or not, it is
The barred owl. Yeah.
the barred owl. The barred owl, and in this case, the barred owl, I kind of think of it as like a super predator. These birds have expanded their range from the eastern United States in just 100 years, all the way across the plains, all the way into the Pacific Northwest in just the last century. They're so adaptable to a wide variety of habitats. They can eat all sorts of prey items, so they have a very wide-ranging diet. And couple this with some reproductive advantages. These are birds that, for one thing, they're 20% larger than northern spotted owls, but they also have more young more frequently. And all of this adds up to really the ability for barred owls to completely outcompete spotted owls within their habitat. So pretty alarming to biologists when they figured this out. And after about 7 years of difficult conversations, the US Fish and Wildlife Service made the decision to begin a barred owl removal program. They started with a pilot program down in the Redwoods, and they trained some biologists to basically remove barred owls with 12 gauge shotguns. Now, you know how controversial that was. As soon as the plan was announced, the Fish and Wildlife Service was sued by animal rights groups. But the experimental program began and continued. And about 2,000 owls were removed in the experimental program. And on the right on the map here, what I want you to see are the areas, 3 areas where this removal program was expanded to from the redwoods. So the blue polygons are those areas where they did not remove barred owls, okay? The pinkish red areas are those where they did remove barred owls from, so they had something to compare it with, right? So what did they get? What did they find out at the end of those 5 years? Well, if we take a look at this table, and I will distill this down in just a minute, but if we look, so these birds were not being removed from Mount Rainier, all right? They're being removed closest to me and to you, I guess, the Clay Elm area. And if you look at the first year non-breeding, NB 2015-2016, researchers removed looks like about 120 or 125 barred owls. Second season, non-breeding the next year, looks like they took about 80. And in the breeding season of 2017, they didn't remove any. And so on across at each of the 3 areas over this 5-year period. So what do the numbers tell us? What are we getting out of this? From these removals, where they just left the barred owls go, their control areas, barred owls were not removed, spotted owls continued to decline by 83%. But in areas where the barred owls were removed, spotted owls increased by 12%. So what researchers are finding is when barred owls are removed from spotted owl habitat, spotted owls have a tendency to come back and repopulate that area. So what does that mean long term? You know, what does that tell us? And I should say that at this point, there's a plan to possibly continue removing barred owls, with which biologists figure, and again, controversial, biologists figure that that is still less than 1% of the barred owl population in the West, that it's a pretty small amount of owls, and they feel that it's worth the risk and it's worth the controversy. The other questions are whether or not the listing of the northern spotted owl might be changed, and would that afford it more protections? Right now, that's not in the cards, but we're not sure what the next few years may bring. So this is the end of our talk of the first special bird at Mount Rainier. And certainly, as you can see, this is one of those birds whose future is really still in the balance. So if we were to move on to our second special bird at Mount Rainier, here it is on the water, and we'll figure that out in just a minute. So here's your multiple choice guesses. Is it A, a great auk, B, Cassin's auklet, C, marbled murrelet, D, pigeon guillemot? What's your best guess?
Marbled.
Marbled murrelet it is. And I don't know about you, but usually when I see marbled murrelets, they're on the water like this at a distance, or better yet, they're flying away from me, or even better yet, they're diving, and they just, as soon as you get your glasses up to your face, they dive underwater. And you might be wondering at this point, now wait a minute, aren't marbled murrelets seabirds, and what exactly does that have to do with Mount Rainier? Well, that's part of their crazy story, which we're going to get to momentarily. So for scale, here is a marbled murrelet in the hand. Apparently a bird in the hand is worth 2 on the water. And these are about the size and shape of, well, like a papaya, okay? That's about how big a marbled murrelet is. I think probably papayas, to me, would probably taste much better than marbled murrelets. And I think marbled murrelets probably fly a lot better than papayas. But this gives you a sense for their size. These are members of the alcid family, so that puts them in with the puffins, the guillemots, the murres, those kind of birds, seabirds. And most all of these birds are seabirds. Most all of these birds nest, at sea or on the coast, in cliffs, rocky cliffs, those sorts of things. Except for this crazy bird, the marbled murrelet was actually the last nest nesting bird discovered in North America. All the, whatever it was, 200 and some other nests of birds had been discovered, and the National Audubon Society in 1970 finally said, enough. We're going to offer a cash reward for the first verified nest of the marbled murrelet. And it even still wasn't until another 4 years later that a tree climber, an arborist, a couple hundred feet up a Douglas fir tree in a state park in California, came face to face with a marbled murrelet nestling. And that was the first nest that was discovered of the marbled murrelet. So if we take a look at their range, these are birds that from the Central Oregon coast, Central California coast up Oregon, all the way up along BC, Alaska coast, and all the way out the Aleutians, where there's still good numbers, thousands and thousands, although they have dropped dramatically in the last 25 years. But if you take a look at just Washington State here, and here you see the Puget Sound region, and now this is the breeding season occurrences. So you would expect to see birds to be found along the shores, right? Along the edge. But what about these inland occurrences? Yeah. And here's Mount Rainier, for Pete's sakes. Holy cow. There's occurrences of marbled murrelets at Mount Rainier National Park? Yes, because I know it doesn't make any sense to me either, but that's what it is. And those crazy birds nest in old growth forests. As I mentioned, in this region, they seem to prefer Douglas firs, big ones, oftentimes most of the way up a tree. This is a single marbled murrelet egg. They lay one egg on, if you can call that a nest, it's kind of a depression, a moss-lined depression, usually in a big branch on a Doug fir. Here's an adult bird on an egg. And so breeding season, which is at its height in July, what you've got going on, say at Mount Rainier National Park, and I've been up to the Carbon River area, had studied some maps, had studied some surveys of where marbled murrelets had been recorded. Now, we don't have any proof yet, no verified nests of marbled murrelets nesting at Mount Rainier National Park. But if you go up there at early in the morning, what's going on is these birds, the parent birds, they take turns incubating the eggs. They work a 24-hour shift, and they switch off at first light. So these are birds that are hard to see in the first place. Well, it's dark. They're cryptically colored. They're incredibly fast flyers. These little buggers they've been clocked at 100 miles an hour, if you can believe that, and they regularly are clocked at 45 to 75 miles an hour. So in this particular area, in the Carbon River, old growth forest, where these birds have been documented, that's about 50 miles from Puget Sound. So the idea is one parent bird stays on the egg for 24 hours, pretty motionless, doesn't do much of anything but keep the egg warm, maybe turns it occasionally, while the other bird, the mate, is down feeding in Puget Sound. First light, the birds change positions, and during which there's a lot of ruckus and a lot of activity and calling because it's dark and they're trying to find each other. These are also birds that are solitary nesters. So again, they're not real easy to see. And here, look at the camel on this one. Here's a little helper to help you see this bird. So once the young bird hatches, then both parents go into high gear in terms of feeding, and they will fly all the way to Puget Sound, get the biggest sand lance or anchovy or Pacific herring that they can find, grab that thing, but in their bill, it'll be, the fish will be crosswise in their bill, fly back the 50 miles to the nest, feed the young bird, turn around and head back to Puget Sound. Each of these birds can fly hundreds of miles a day during the time that they're feeding their young. And please ask me about how these birds fledge. We'll get to that at the end if you want to know. It's unbelievable that any of these birds are alive at all, just what they go through and how the young bird eventually gets out to sea. So as I said, they're impossible to see. But what we do, we learn how to listen for them. And here's what we're going to listen for. So that keer is what we're listening for when we're up on the carbon at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. Have to be careful not to confuse it with common nighthawks, that beer, 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 and they're also on the river at that time of day too. But of the 9 or 10 times that I have been up the carbon at that time of day in the breeding season, I've been able to hear marble murrelets every time. And believe it or not, I've never seen one. So they remain really elusive and hard to see. But we know they're up there, and there's lots of other evidence, other researchers that have documented their presence up there as well. So with all these things going for them in terms of cryptic coloration, fast flyers, solitary nesters, active in these dim early morning hours, you would think, man, no problem. Well, actually, they do have some problems. One is predation, and it's corvids that are responsible for about 75% of the predation of marble murrelets, both the young birds and the adults. In fact, some recreation areas in California have adopted like a campaign that's called Feed a Jay, Kill a Murrelet. And what they're trying to do is to educate visitors and induce them to understand that by feeding the other birds, jays and crows, for example, that attracts them into the area. And if there are murrelets in the area, those birds are going to find them and predate on them. It turns out actually that it's not predation that's the biggest problem for marble murrelets. And similar to the northern spotted owls, it's a loss of habitat. That's been the big bugger, the big problem, and over a 20% loss in the last 20 years. And in the most recent on-water survey of marble murrelets has found a decline of 44% of the birds in Washington. So if you, like me, are a longtime birder, and if you've said to yourself when you've been over here on this side the last few times and said, man, I don't see marble murrelets the way I used to. Well, there's a reason for that. There are far, far fewer than there were 25, 30 years ago. Now, the good news is that the birds are stable in Oregon, California. They're not doing well in Alaska, even though there are still thousands and thousands. As I said earlier, they've declined by about 70% in the last 25 years. So researchers here in the state recommend this bird be moved to state endangered status, hoping that some additional protections and research money would help this bird get a grip on survival. And they have a few questions, researchers do. They'd like to see if it's possible to provide incentives, get landowners to get a tax break by preserving or improving marble murrelet habitat. They'd also like to find out whether or not these birds will nest in second growth forests. Nobody's done much work on that yet, but it would be an interesting thing to find out, and it might be one of the keys to help this bird's numbers. And finally, there's a lot of question about what are the effects of a warming climate, particularly ocean waters, on the forage fish. So, sand lances and anchovies and herring, if they struggle, if their numbers drop as a result of warming waters, well then what effect might that also have on the marble murrelet number? So again, not a great picture right now, but having met and spoken with some of the researchers, you can't find people that are more dedicated to their work, that are more interested in what they're doing and are trying to find a way to figure out these incredibly difficult puzzles. So that's our second special bird. Let's move on to our third and last special bird. And as I said, this one has a little uplift to the story. So, I forgot to tell you something. This bird actually does not occur within the boundaries of Mount Rainier National Park. I hope you're okay with that. It occurs in the Nisqually watershed. And I thought, well, the Nisqually Glacier, begins on the summit of Mount Rainier. It's one of a handful of glaciers that start at the summit. gives birth to the Nisqually River, runs 78 miles down to Billy Frank Jr., Nisqually National Wildlife Refuge. And right here, what you and I are looking at are the Nisqually prairies, some of the finest and most important remaining prairie oak ecosystem in North America, really. So the bird that I want to share with you, here it is. And so tell me what you think this is. Is it A, angry bird? B, American pipit? C, western meadowlark? Or D, hornlark? And,
The hornlark.
and notice the bracelets on this bird. So you can tell that this is a bird that has been probably captured and recaptured by researchers more than once. You're right, it's a streaked horned lark, Eremophila alpestris strigata. Strigata means streaked. And there's a bunch of horned larks. You've seen horned larks, and there are 24 subspecies. The ones that I usually see in the summer up at Mount Rainier are a different subspecies called alpini. So this is the streaked horned larks. This is a bird of the prairie, the native prairie that once stretched from Canada all the way down to Oregon. And now just fewer than 3% of the original native prairie remains. And so, as you can imagine, that loss of habitat has really had a huge effect on the biodiversity. 45 species of plants that are on various watch lists, endangered, threatened. Over half of the bird species have been impacted with population losses or range reductions or extirpated altogether. So, so the question is, first, where were they? This is a biologist's interpretation, best guess from the research and the data at what was the original range of horned larks, streaked horned larks 100 years ago. So we may have probably had them on Vancouver Island in southwesternmost BC. Here in the Puget Sound region, we're actually going to visit some sites here in just a moment. Also out along the coast, along the Columbia, and down the Willamette Valley in Oregon. So here's what we've got today in terms of some streaked hornlark nesting sites. So these birds have not been made locally extinct. They're not extirpated. We've got a handful of sites in the South Puget Sound, some out on the coast, and a smattering along the Columbia. Okay, so let's take a look at these and see if we can kind of get close up and learn a little bit more about these birds. This is actually a map of Joint Base Lewis McChord. You might be familiar with this as the huge Army and Air Force base that sits between Tacoma and Olympia. Oh, here's Tacoma, right? Okay, and so all these yellow polygons are Joint Base Lewis McChord, and all the black ones are occupied streaked horned lark study sites. So this is where there are birds as recently as 2 years ago, and probably are birds nesting there right now. This is the prime time. Also notice that there's a population at the Shelton Airport, Sanderson Airport at Shelton, and also at the Olympia Airport. Now, so the bad news is you and I can't go looking for these birds because number one, it's the breeding season. Number two, they're protected. And number three, they're on federal land like JBLM, Joint Base Lewis McChord. But what we can do, we can take a bit of a virtual field trip here and check out the Nisqually Prairie a little bit, look at some of these birds and see what some of the work is that's being done on their behalf. Pretty interesting stuff. So starting out, here we are in the Nisqually Prairie. We're looking down. Do you see any birds? Do you see any birds? No, Jeff, I don't see any birds. How about now? Do you see any birds? Here's a helper. So yeah, we've got a few nestlings in here, streaked horned lark chicks. So these are birds that are ground nesters, and you scratch your head when you say, how is that a good idea? Well, the birds are cryptic. You can see they're quite well camouflaged. The adults build really well concealed nests, and still predation is part of the deal for them. In fact, why does this researcher look so frumpy? You know, why does Adam look so unhappy? Well, here's a close-up. Adam is holding a predated streaked horned lark nest. You can see this egg has been broken open here. And in many cases, that means that that nest is going to be abandoned by the adult birds. So predation is part of the deal, but it wasn't that that really got the biologists' attention. What stood out from their data was that the streaked-horned larks at Joint Base Lewis-McChord had a very low hatch rate. Not as many eggs were hatching as a robust population would have. And they also had a low fledging rate. Fewer birds were being recruited as adults into the population than in other populations of birds in other places. Biologists pinpointed this as a lack of genetic diversity, some inbreeding that was going on. And what they figured the fix was to increase the genetic diversity. So they created what they called the Genetic Rescue Project. And this is biologist language really for kind of a fancy and elaborate kidnapping plot. And here's how it works. They've got a robust population of streaked-horned larks down at the airport in Corvallis, Oregon, okay? These birds will re-nest 4 or 5 times in a season. So if you swipe a nest and the eggs and you translocate it up to Joint Base Lewis-McChord, those Corvallis birds will build another nest and raise another brood of eggs. So they cooked up this idea, let's get the conditions exactly perfectly right at the right time of year. And early in the morning, we'll have biologists drive down to Corvallis, scoop up one of the nests with eggs in it that the biologists down there have identified, bring it back up to JBLM, put it into an area where we know we have a pair of streaked-horned lark adults. They haven't built a nest yet, but we have a pair. Let's see if we can trick them into adopting basically and raising these birds that they're not, biologically related to. So crazy idea. And of course it works, and it works well. So here's Tremaine, and that is not, she does not have like a pan of lasagna. She's not going to a potluck, folks. What she's got there is a plug-in incubator. This is how they transport the nests from Corvallis back up to Joint Base Lewis-McChord. If everything is going well, it gets back up to JBLM and it looks like this. This is an average sized clutch. I think 3 to 5 is kind of the ballpark for the clutch size. And if things go well, 2 weeks later, you get bonus, you get a bingo, Now, this is not the same clutch. This was actually kind of a record-setting, super healthy female. Look at all these young in here. So let's see if we can count the beaks and determine how many nestlings are in this particular nest. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Isn't that amazing? 6 young in 1 clutch. That's got to be close to a record. Yeah. Now, before we leave the Nisqually Prairie, I want to be sure to introduce you to Brian. He is one of the rock stars of this whole project. And notice it's not just because he's got 2 bracelets on each leg. It's because Brian was one of the translocated eggs from Corvallis, moved up to Joint Base Lewis-McChord, hatched, fledged, and returned at least 3 seasons to breed, helping to boost the genetic diversity, exactly what the biologists were hoping to do at JBLM. So as we wrap up this part with this 3rd bird, there's really some great news. So not only are the numbers increasing, they've instituted what they call some conservation measures at Joint Base Lewis-McChord. They get people on the ground at this time of year finding nests. And they use GPS to nail down the location of those nests. And then they report that to the people who manage the training exercises, that manage the airfield. And when they know where the birds are, they can get troops to avoid those areas. And that really does help the numbers of birds and reduce the number of impacts on the birds by armed personnel. So what that's done in just the last handful of years, we've seen an increase over a 6-fold of pairs of streaked-horned larks at McChord Field from 8 to 50. On the Nisqually Prairie, the native prairie at JBLM, from 12 to 40 pairs in the last 10 years. So this is really good news. These birds really have a sporting chance at clearing the bar here and in getting back to healthy population. Now, there's a couple problems still to solve. At Shelton and at Olympia, they don't have those conservation measures instituted yet. And so there's the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife staff are working with folks at those airports to try to get them to, start these on the ground surveys. And when you have that kind of information, then you can work with people to get them to change their mowing regimes. If they mow differently and they mow different areas and they leave the areas alone where there are birds, that's really going to help. So those numbers are still decreasing at Olympia and Shelton, but there's hope that maybe things will turn around at those spots too. So as we start to wrap things up, I thought maybe we would just end up with a few questions here, just to kind of land on some of the main ideas. Okay, so I've got a couple here in northern spotted owls. This is a true false. Says that they're declining at Mount Rainier, but are doing well in other portions of their range. What do you think? True or false?
False.
Yeah, that's false. They're not doing so good anywhere in the range in the west. Number two, the two key factors in their decline are A, loss of old growth habitat, B, poaching by hunters, C, competition from barred owls, and D, lack of prey. We're looking for two factors that have really led to the continued decline of the northern spotted owl. The answers are A, loss of old growth, and C, competition from barred owls. So let's take a look at a couple of questions that concern the marbled murrelets. Appear to be the only alcid that nests in old growth forests. True or false? So far as we know, they're the wacky ones. That's true. And here's their multiple choice. Marbled murrelet numbers may improve with two developments. Here are the two things that could help. Breeding programs that train the birds to have larger clutches.
No.
Good luck with that one. B, landowners can be persuaded to preserve habitat. C, predator removal programs begin and succeed. Or D, murrelets can adapt to nesting in second growth forests. Two developments that could help would be landowners preserve habitat, and D, murrelets adapt to nesting in second growth forests. And last, a couple of questions about the streaked-horned larks.
But he did talk about trying to convince.
Streaked-horned larks are just one of the many prairie bird species impacted by habitat loss. True or false?
True.
That is true.
True.
About over half of the prairie birds have had some kind of impact as a result of habitat loss. And the multiple choice for the streaked-horned lark, all of these factors contribute to the lark's recovery, except one, and that is A, an increasing the frequency of mowing, B, the Oregon Nest Translocation Project, C, nest finding and other conservation measures, D, communicating nest locations to airfield managers. Only one of those things does not help, and that is, that's correct, A, increasing the frequency of mowing. So if you wanted to just kind of check and see how you did, I'd say, I just hope you've enjoyed yourself and learned a few things and gotten inspired maybe to visit Mount Rainier this summer. But if you've gotten most of them right, or if you've gotten them all right, you could be as smart as a Clark's Nutcracker for all I know. So before we head into the questions and answers, just a couple of public service announcements, if you will. Leslie, thank you for talking about the book, and if you'd like to get a copy of it, folks, you can get it from my website. Support your local bookstore. That's a great idea. They're available online as well.
You can also get it directly from WSU.
Oh yeah, thank you. Also can get it straight from the press.
Far better than Amazon.
Yeah. And I don't know if you know this, but I do have a couple of other talks that I give now that are completely different. Lots of good images like this one. Kind of the flagship talk is called Tahoma's Biggest Stories. And in that one, I take you on a virtual field trip to explore some of these archaeological sites. We didn't know this 50 years ago. Native people have been going up to the mountain for over 9,000 years. Some really great stories. And the other thing that escapes a lot of people are the effects of climate change at Mount Rainier, far beyond just the retreating glaciers. And so I talk about those things in that talk. And in the other talk is the virtual field trip in the Nisqually River watershed. And first I introduce folks to the original inhabitants of the valley, the Squalliops, the people of the river, people of the grass, the Nisqually people. And then we start at the glacier, right where the river begins, the terminus of the glacier, follow it 78 river miles until it empties into Puget Sound, another one of my favorite places on the planet, down at the refuge there. And, you know, if you like stories, I send a new one out to my subscribers every month. No strings attached. Don't do anything with your email address except send you a new story every month. I'm writing one right now about the Wonderland Trail to publish here in the next week or so. So, and you can find me pretty easily. It's just my name, Antonelis-Lapp.com. All right. So with that, I'll stop my share, come up for air, and I hope that you got some great questions. I'm ready.
So Jeff, I have one, this is Leslie. I have one question. Just going back to the beginning of your talk when you were talking about ear asymmetry and boreal owls.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit more about why that's happening.
Yeah, well, the way that I understand it, and I don't know about you folks, but I am pretty lousy at being able to locate the exact location of a bird based on just hearing it. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it's in that tree. We just had this problem a couple of days ago trying to find a doggone flicker that was in the maple tree, you know? And, you know, so we've got ears like this. And so when we have an object out in front of us, we've got kind of this flat triangle that our brain can build, and that's as good as we got. If an organism like many of the owls have their ears, you know, positioned asymmetrically, then what they can do is their brain can create a 3D image of where that is, where that sound is coming from. So they can essentially triangulate, right,
Okay.
to locate where that object is. And when you're feeding in the dark, even if you got big eyes and you got good eyesight, when you're feeding in the dark like many of these owls are, then boom, you've got an added advantage to be able to pinpoint the location of where that little scratching sound is coming from.
It's almost, in some ways, it's almost like sonar in bats a bit.
Yeah, don't bats do the bounce back thing? Don't they
Exactly.
emit
Yes,
emit a
yes.
sound and
Yes,
it- it-
they
it-
echololite.
yeah, and it bounces back. Yeah.
There's a
Well-
place south of Puget Sound that is a prairie preserve, I believe. I've never been there, but the Mima Mountains, I was wondering
Yeah.
if streaked hornlarks there.
Thanks for your question. So are there streaked horned larks at Mima Mounds? There are not any that are nesting there. And the first time I got asked this question, I was completely stumped. And so I had to go to my streaked horned lark man, who's done a lot of the research, and said, "Hey, Adrian, help me out here." And he said, "Well, we have some records of streaked horned larks passing through the Mima Mounds, but we don't have any breeding records of them in the period of time that they've been keeping track of that." So the answer is no. That is some good habitat for them. And if you haven't been to the Mima Mounds, put that on your list of things to do the next time you're over on this side of the Cascades, because that's a pretty awesome spot to go to. Other comments or questions?
What particular,
You're muted.
oh, no, I'm not. What particular part of the native prairie are the streaked horned larks attracted to then? I mean, it's not the airplanes, obviously.
Right.
That they're occurring on the airfields, and of course it's common throughout the nation that some of our military bases have the prime habitat for our prairie land birds, because they they're off limits to the public.
Yeah.
And so the habitat is there. But
Yeah.
what is it that the streaked hornlark needs that like the Mima mounds aren't providing?
That's super, super. And I don't know the answer to that question. What is it that the prairies that they have there that it doesn't have at Mima mounds? I honestly don't have. I'm going to have to go back to Adrian and ask him to help me with that one. So you would think that there would be, nesting populations at both locations. And you're right. It doesn't. It has less to do, of course, with the military in airfields. If we think back, 100 years ago, these were birds that had just had evolved this affinity for this kind of a habitat and moved into it. These grassland prairies where there's no trees other than mostly like Gary oaks, right? And that they're a ground nester, and that was the habitat for them. So no other reason that I could think of why they would avoid or why they wouldn't have been nesting at Mima mounds. I mean, you would think it would make sense, and I don't have the answer to that.
Jeff, I think you're waiting for somebody to ask about the fledging of the marble bullets.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Good job.
that's right.
Hey, Pico.
So I mean, come on, these birds. First of all, what are you doing flying 50 miles or more in Washington? I think up to 75 miles. These birds have flown from the sea inland to nest. So we're talking about a monstrous commute to begin with, right? And so here's this single bird that's hatched. It takes about 28 days to get ready to fledge. And so at 26, 27, 28 days, it's preening out, it's naddle down, it's flapping its wings. Its biology is telling it that it's getting ready, that it's getting close to time to head to the ocean. Problem is, it doesn't have any instructions. None of the parents has, given it a pep talk. Nobody has shown it a map. The time comes, usually at dusk, when this bird just has the urge to leave the nest and fly to Puget Sound. And what we know is that they basically use the rivers as their compass. You use the rivers to guide them. And it's crucial that they not lose altitude. I mean, you're getting a head start if you figure they're 120, 150, 180 feet up in a tree. They're going to throw themselves out of the nest, flap like crazy, hope they catch wind, follow the river down to Puget Sound. So they're doing something they've never done before, going to somewhere they've never been to do something they've never done, that is to learn to feed for themselves. So without any accompaniment by the parents, these birds cast themselves off the nest, probably make it to Puget Sound if they're, let's just continue with the Carbon River example. So if there are birds nesting up there, probably gets to the Carbon from the Carbon to the Sound in about an hour or so. But if
We don't have a picture of ours.
But if they lose altitude, they're sunk. They can't. They don't get a second chance. They don't get liftoff again. So it's really just, to me, it's one of the mind-boggling things of all birds. And it's no surprise that the marble murrelets are in trouble, right? When you factor in habitat loss, then it just makes all the more sense in the world. So that's a little bit of the story of how those birds fledge and how they hurl themselves out of the nest and hopefully get to Puget Sound. When they get there, they probably go, well, where am I now? And they figure out pretty soon on their own how to evade predators and how to fend for themselves, how to dive and how to feed themselves. Pretty great story. I love that. Thanks for asking.
So Jeff, maybe this is kind of stupid, but why aren't they with their parents? I mean, I would assume that they would be with their parents if their parents aren't having to feed them anymore.
Yeah. I don't have the answer to that question, and it doesn't make any sense to us, does it? Yeah. You would think they would get a little guidance. Tough love. I don't know. Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, for the marble murrelet, I understand that they prefer to nest in the old growth Douglas fir. And that makes sense for our western coast up into Canada. But when you get up into Alaska and where they're out on the peninsula and whatnot, you're getting outside of Douglas fir habitat, and you're more into that scrubby black spruce. So
Yeah.
where do they nest up in Alaska?
Ground nesters.
They're ground nesters.
Yeah, so there's a lot of evidence that a lot of the birds, as you said, where the habitat is different, they're ground nesters. But even still, nobody figured that out until the 1970s.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, so they ground nest the way, many of the other seabirds do, either on the ground or, rocky cliffs, that sort of stuff. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else, folks?
Yes, it seems that the marbled murrelet may play an important role in nutrient cycling too, by bringing, all those fish that they bring to their young to the old growth forests.
Super good point. Yeah, that would make all the sense in the world, wouldn't it? And probably not on the scale that the anadromous fish, that the salmon bring when they migrate back up to spawn. But still, you're exactly right. They're bringing nutrients from the salt water up into the old growth forest. And not that I know of, has anybody done any studies on the effects of the marine-borne nutrients that are brought into the old growth forest by marble murrelets. There's lots of work been done on, salmonids, bringing up nutrients, but nothing that I know of. I'm not a master of the literature, but I do keep paying attention to these things to try to stay up on it.
Mhm.
Yeah, good thinking.
So Margie, did Jeff get it right on with the owl research?
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I agree. We heard a talk a few months earlier, Jeff, about the about the spotted owl, some of the spotted owl research. It was all we heard about really was what was going on in Cle Elum. And what you presented was a very nice addition to what we'd already heard about, and knew that the Cle Elum population is hugely decreased.
Yeah.
And they haven't had as much success with shooting the birds, the barred owls, as much as I think California and Oregon have. But I think that's, isn't it true, Margie, that they're gonna continue to do that for a while?
I don't really know.
Crescent shooting, okay.
That's the last that I knew, was that there were plans to continue. I don't remember what the timeline was. Do you remember the name of the presenter, just by the way, on the presenter on the Cle Elum owls?
Actually, I can't think of her last name.
Jeff, I can get you that information if you
Sure.
want. It was Ashley, I've forgotten her last name too, Margie.
Okay.
I believe it is.
Okay, just curious. Yeah, good.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Always trying to connect and find out who's doing what, and maybe I can mooch some information from people.
Oh, now I remember. It was Ashley Nicholson, wasn't it?
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, Mikelsen, as I recall.
Okay.
And she works for the Forest Service, Margie, doesn't she?
She worked for Oregon State University, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
All right. Good. Thank you. Good sleuthing. Well, any other questions or comments?
That was a fascinating presentation. Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
I'm anxious to read your book now.
Good, good. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, folks. And again, Leslie, thank you for reaching out and making the connection, and happy to come back, next fall or winter. If any of the other talks are of interest to you folks, I'd be happy to share those with you too.
And Jeff, how background scene there? It looks like you're north of the mountain, but I can't quite place where you might be. Something like North Peak.
You're north of the mountain. You're right. Not Norse Peak. So I think Norse Peak would be a little
Too far
east.
south.
Yeah, and east. So this is within the park boundaries, from within Mount Rainier National Park.
Looks
So-
like
so
one of
you
the
didn't-
trails out of Sunrise.
Ooh,
Yeah.
now you're sneaking up on it.
Yeah, I would say, yeah.
Now you're sneaking up on it. Okay, well, you didn't win a whole book, but I could send you the index or something.
Oh,
It's
not-
okay. Hopefully I'll get people interested
Burroughs
in
Mountain, we think.
What's that?
Burroughs Mountain, we think.
That's another good guess. Not from Burroughs, but your folks are in the right area. You're in the right region of the park. It is from Sunrise. And yeah. So do you want me to tell you or not?
Yeah, we want to, yeah,
You want to know? Okay. So it's actually at what's called Skyscraper Pass. So it's actually a spot on the Wonderland Trail, the 93-mile trail around the mountain. And the way that all happened was just complete luck, coincidence. It was a gorgeous day in October. Got up to Skyscraper Pass, and in my webmaster had said, "Man, we need some more photographs of you in the mountain," And I walked up to Skyscraper Pass. And here's a guy with his camera set up and his tripod. And I'm like, "Hi, you're my new friend." And so he took a bunch of photographs for me, and it was really nice of him to do that. So yeah, Skyscraper Pass at Mount Rainier. Yeah, beautiful day in October.
I remember.
Oh, wow.
I don't think I've been there.
Well, thank you, everybody. Had a good time. I hope you did too. And
Thanks very much, Jeff. This was really great. Really appreciate it. And I suspect a lot of people will be visiting the recording that we make.
Good.
That will be available on Zoom for the next month. So if you want to tell any of your blog folks,
I will do that. So so the recording is available where?
It will be through a Kittitas Audubon, but it's in the cloud. And so it will be available for 30 days.
Okay,
And Zoom will send the link
I see.
later tonight, and
Got
then
it.
we send it out to our membership, but we'll make sure we send it to you too.
That's great. Good. All right. Thank you. All right. Anything else?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. Thanks, folks. Good night.
good night.
Bye now.
Good night, everybody. Hello, Gloria and Gia and Gary.
Yeah. Hi, everyone.
Barry's back.
Barry got back yesterday.
All right.
We're back over 24 hours now.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So we'll
Just
see
a
you
little-
Saturday, Leslie. You need to send me
Yes.
directions.
Yes, will do.
Yeah,
Okay.
don't use
We-
GPS.
Don't use GPS. We'll send you directions.
Okay.
GPS doesn't work very well up here.
All righty.
All righty, take care.
All right, good night.